Welcome back to another episode of Witty Banter. Your hosts Nabil, Daniel, and Anika are here. My voice is temporarily out, so I'll be talking softly on this one. And our special guest today is Gerardo Pacheco. Gerardo, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the
Um,
invitation.
yeah. So maybe we could just start off by telling us a little bit about what you do. Um, I know you teach, so maybe you could talk a little bit about that, where you teach.
Yeah. Well, thank you. First of all, thank you for the invitation. I think that's really nice. Being here on a Sunday
Yeah.
afternoon
Yeah.
and learning a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
I'm an instructor at a community college at Cañada College, and I'm a writer. I try to write poetry as much as possible, and that's
What
pretty
came
much it.
first? What came first, the writing or the teaching?
The learning, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you
Tell
were
us,
my instructor at some point, so
tell us more about your journey from, learning to teaching to writing, and what you write about.
well, I think everything begins at Cañada College.
Mm-hmm.
Learning English as a second language, and then um, getting starting writing and going to college. I mean, to university to get that degree as a MFA, and then just getting writing a little bit, and afterwards getting to teaching. So first writing, then
Mm-hmm.
teaching. I guess that's the
Mm-hmm.
way it came.
Now you write in more than, you speak more than one language. Tell us a bit about the languages you speak, and then how and why, and.
Yeah, so I'm a native Mayan, and I do speak a little bit of Mayan, and I understand a lot of Mayan. But my English is better than my Maya and my Spanish is.
Mm-hmm.
Was the Mayan civilization, was that all in Mexico, or did that spread further south too?
So we covered from Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador, all that Central America, in Yucatan, Mexico, and the south of Mexico.
Gotcha.
So we were spread all over that area.
Is your poetry in primarily in English or what?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And that's the kind of strangest thing because, like I say, I learned the language, and then with that learning also came learning to write poetry.
Oh, okay.
So it's a difficult thing to pull, to write something in Spanish. In Mayan, that's another.
Tell us more a bit about why the language of your birth is difficult to be creative in.
I don't know. I get lazy when it comes to writing in Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
I don't hear the same musicality of the words, or the inspiration doesn't come when
Mm-hmm.
it is in as it is in English.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess it's part of the instruction to um, going through that master program in English makes
Mm-hmm.
I mean, at least in my case, made a whole lot of difference. So when it comes to my native language, it's a difficult thing to just say I'm gonna write something.
Do you think that has to do with maybe when you learn your first language, you're learning it more as a utility just to communicate with people, and then maybe when you picked up your second language, you you're thinking about it more, and maybe that sparks more imagination? Do you think that could be the reason, or?
In a way, I think it's yes, I think there is something about that in a second language you find a way of expressing something.
Mm.
And I've been speaking English for now maybe 15, 20 years or so.
Mm-hmm.
No more than that, but so I guess I've been using more English than Spanish and then Mayan for the longest. So I think that actually counts into how to express. I think when it comes to poetry, I believe it's all about tools, and I think that's the way I was taught how to write poetry in English.
Mm.
Yeah.
But your imagery is all, or maybe of the poems that I am familiar with, and you can kind of clarify
Yeah.
the images and the metaphors that you've used. But for many of your poems, you have used images and metaphors that are related to your life in Mexico, and
Mm-hmm.
so what's the relationship between the images or your experiences and the language of your choice?
That's a really good, nice. It's a really good question because I've been thinking about what is poetry and why am I writing poetry lately.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the way I see poetry is you're writing a story, and it's just about the way you communicate the story. So for me, writing poetry is also accessing to my background, my history, and those memories that I have as a kid in Mexico. So when I write, and I tend just to share a story. I mean, tell a story, and with that, I just go back to what I know,
Mm-hmm.
which is what I left in Mexico, what I lived there, and what experienced there too. So
Do you imagine if you ever left California, which I don't know why you would, but if you did, would does the distance help you
huh,
to create the imagery?
I think so. I think so. It's also not only the distance, but it's that the memory of what you experienced at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So the connections that you have, right? As
Mm-hmm.
I'm getting older, it's becoming um, more clear that what I lived as a kid is really coming to the forefront of what I'm writing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I just wrote a poem or a collection of poems about my family and it's just basically all about memories, right?
Mm.
And the way I saw things and the way I saw specific issues within my family.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I don't know, I don't know, but memory is really important. And yes, I think if I ever leave California.
That would be so. You've written about your family, and we're family sitting here, and we know we all have different memories of things.
Yeah.
And have you created any level of conflict in your family with the memories, the way you see them, and how others in your family see those memories?
Well, not really because
Or acceptance,
yeah.
or family members saying, "Huh, that's interesting. You saw it that way.
Mhm.
Or yes, I totally agree. This is exactly how I saw that memory as well."
Actually, no, I haven't had a conversation with my
Mhm.
my my siblings about that, but I use one of my sister's story to access all the memories, if you will,
Mhm.
and that leads me to because my sister is maybe 10, 12 years older,
Mhm.
so she had the opportunity to live with my grandparents and my uncles, which
Mhm.
I didn't have, and that actually gives an opportunity to see a different perspective.
Mhm.
So it's kind of like I'm asking her, she's telling me, right? And I'm processing this, and then those stories come back into my own writing, and
Mhm.
kind of like just, you know, and I'm reliving them, but I'm
So it's a memory. It's someone else's memory reinterpreted through the filter of your own
perspective,
recognition or
yeah,
perspective
yeah.
of the space. And I'm wondering now, with our two hosts here,
Mm.
they have a connection with a culture which is unique and different, um, and memories that are second-hand memories because they come through parents or people who have lived in a certain area, at a
Well,
certain time.
I was thinking two things. One, with when we were talking kind of about linguistics and having,
Mhm.
multiple languages. Do you think that the way or whatever language you were brought up with shapes the way you think? Because I've heard, at least in the German language, that a lot of their tense is future tense. And so there's a theory that because they're always thinking in future tense, that they're always planning for the future. Do you think, like, I guess both of you can answer that because we're not
Hmm.
bilingual.
You're attempted bilingual.
Yeah, attempted bilingual. Failed
Don't know
bilingual.
if-
Well, Nabil can speak a little code. So
Sure.
maybe eventually he'll be thinking in code.
Yeah.
Well, that's
Do you
what I
think
was
as-
thinking as well, that code being a language as well, and I was wondering if he
Yeah.
was picking up to
No, I
even
don't really
equate.
think in it's like I think about like what the end product will be like. Ooh, it'll be cool if like I like the idea of thinking about games.
Mhm.
So I think, oh, it'd be cool if I had a game where I could do this functionality.
But do you think it translates?
But I don't. But coding for me is just like a means to the end. So I don't really like
Like would
think in code.
like the way you have like components in code. Like, do you think that might be
Yeah,
a way
on a
where
more
you're-
macro level, I'll think
Yeah.
like, okay, like if I'm trying to solve a problem, I'll think like, how am I going to solve this problem? Connect these two components together, but I won't like think very micro level, like,
Mm,
okay, this is exactly the function that I have to write to connect these two.
mm.
I just think, oh, I have to connect these two, so then do it. But no, I don't really think in it. But what were you saying?
I was just saying, like, do you think it translates at all into your real life, like the way I like
Oh,
create components in my room?
yeah.
Like,
Well, I mean,
organize my room or
it helps you like
organize my
maintain a logical way of thinking.
either something works or it doesn't.
Yeah, or you just like, and even to solve like human problems, you try and apply your because you're basically problem solving. So you try and apply those same skills to like human problems, but sometimes it doesn't
Translate.
translate as easily.
What about Urdu or Spanish or Mayan?
Well, it's interesting because we're both teachers
Yeah.
of language,
Mm-hmm.
and our end goal, when you talk about what's the end goal,
Yeah.
we use language to teach language.
Yeah.
But you also use language to be creative and create poetry.
Yeah.
So rather than me answering that question, I'm going to pose it to Gerardo. Since he's
Answer
our
a question
guest.
with a question.
deflect?
Yes, exactly.
Well, I guess it's kind of like the way you learn the language, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the ability, you have this pool of words, language, and then what do you do with that?
Mm-hmm.
For some people, it's an immediate thing, right? You can use it at work, you can use it, and I think I went through that same phase. But what happened to me while I was doing that, it was that I got into writing, and writing is also another way of expressing what you're going through, what you've lived, what you experience, right? And my background, or at least my story coming to the United States, is full of hardships, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
and that actually leads me to need a way of saying things, and I think that's where our language comes, right? Um, you get to learn the language, and then you start thinking about what am I gonna do with this, and then you start sharing your own experiences, if you will.
Tell us about where the poetry started, the poetry in English. What was the beginning?
Can I just interject?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
just related to like the motivation to write. So for you, is the motivation to, is there a relief in expressing yourself? So you talked about like maybe part of your history, there's a lot of hardships, and maybe I imagine it's of it, but maybe nobody else does. Is the motivation like I want to write so I can express myself, and that once I express it, it's like I've expressed it. Is that the motivation for you, or is it something else?
I think it is that, right? I mean, it's kind of like who writes your story is the person who tells, truth about you, right? So for me, writing my story is one, sharing what I know, and sharing or releasing at least something that I'm struggling with, and yes, so I think that's the main,
motivation.
yeah, the motivation, yeah, yeah.
Go ahead. You were.
So my question was related to that.
Yeah.
At what point did you feel that you needed this catharsis through poetry, or that you felt the epiphany that this is now I can use a language in this way? Tell us a bit about that starting of this part of the creative element in your life.
So I think as an instructor, right? When we go to learn how to teach, if you will, we take those classes where you're told, oh, if you at some point you become immersed in the language. So that's what happened to me. When I was learning the language, I really loved writing, just writing sentences and trying them, and it gets to a point where something breaks in my head where I can't write full sentences, and then I start writing small stories, like short stories, if you will, right? Of what I know, what I do, things like
Mm-hmm.
that, right? Journaling, if you
Mm-hmm.
will.
Mm-hmm.
And then it comes to the point where um, I was asked to write a couple poems about, I guess, what is to be an immigrant student at Kenyatta College or so. And then I think that was the first moment
Mm-hmm.
when I was kind of like, I like this. So that was the I think that the moment when I realized that I could write something,
Mm-hmm.
and people will pay attention in a way, right? And
Mm-hmm.
then I think that's the moment when everything begins or begun,
And
if you
then
will.
how did that convert to poetry? Because poetry, I mean, you start by saying putting sentences together, but poetry is reducing sentences to some extent, isn't it?
Yeah. I guess it's also like I say it goes back to that whole idea of the story.
Mm-hmm.
You share a story, you share something personal, and then you gotta just put it into a specific form,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what poetry is, right? As coding, as any
Mm-hmm.
other language, right? You find a little mold, if you will, and
Mm-hmm.
then you just put it there.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what poetry does. Poetry is just the form, right? But
Mm-hmm.
it's true. You in poetry, you are encouraged to take words away because you need a specific line meter, a specific rhythm, etc. Um, so I think if you think about of a longer story, you put it into couple lines,
Mm-hmm.
and that's the beauty of poetry, right? With less lines, you can transmit a lot of messages. And I think that's the beauty of poetry, and that's why poetry has lasted you know, as much as it has.
So it's kind of that whole concept of minimalism and taking away from, and I wonder again, do you feel that taking away actually helps focus on things? So that's kind of my first question, including the two of you as well. But the other question, that before I forget it, because I could very easily forget this, is of these stories that you have written in poetry, I hope that you have brought one or two with you that you'd like to share with us, if you would like. But the other thing I was going to ask you, is there any that you think at some point, I think I want to rephrase this story, this poem, and give it a different structure?
Of course, I think that's a struggle. How can you retell that story in a different way, in a different perspective?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the that's the next thing that I need to go back and see how can I do that.
Because
But yeah.
That's actually funny because
Mhm.
in coding, a lot of times you'll write some sort of functionality and then you'll always go back and be like, okay, how can I make this code cleaner? How can I reduce it? Right now it's like 50 lines. I want to accomplish the same thing in like 20 lines.
Mm.
So yeah, and sometimes you have to just sometimes you can't spend too much time on that because then you're gonna lose out on making other things.
Mm-hmm.
But I just noticed that relationship.
Mhm.
It depends on the context of it, I guess. Because
Mhm.
I was just thinking of like, whenever you look up recipes for food,
Mhm.
sometimes they'll write like a lengthy story of like how they created this recipe, how their grandmother, and really you're just looking for the recipe. So you're like scrolling through this like paragraph. It's like, okay, I just want to see the half cup of eggs or half cup of milk or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it depends on the context, because if you're telling a story about your life, you need context of,
But yeah,
of all the details, and so that people can get the idea. But if you're doing something like coding, or if you're trying to get a function done,
mhm.
or if you're just trying to get a message across more punctually, then yeah, I would say shorter is better.
Yeah, in general, I would agree that if you can make something
Shorter.
more succinct, then
Yeah.
More people are gonna understand it quickly.
Yeah.
And in this era of big data,
Yeah.
you don't have a lot of opportunity. The reader's gonna look and that was too long.
Our
Next.
attention span is less than a minute, so.
But there's the beauty of that extra kind of embellishment of something as well. The story. I'm somehow that I find more interesting of is there a story behind this recipe, and that will help the recipe stay with
Right.
me. And on that note, Gerardo,
Mhm.
at any point, what kind of cook are you, and do you imagine that you would ever write, something about cooking?
A poem about cooking.
Yes.
Not really though. I mean, yeah, it's not about cooking, I think, but it's more about the process of making food, right?
Hmm.
Um, I have, but it's more kind of like in that collection of poems that I just finished. I have a couple poems about killing things,
Mm.
slaughtering, right? So there is a poem that it goes back to that whole thing of memory.
Mm.
How you imagine killing a pig, but at the same time it's in the perspective of a child, of a young person,
Mhm.
and the whole idea is kind of like how you get to kill this thing, and then in a couple poems down there is more about cooking, but it's not like cooking like
No, I get
you
it.
know.
And the reason, one, what's interesting is you said killing and then immediately you switched to slaughtering
Mhm.
just because,
I have
the
to.
reaction to killing. Yes. And I know they have memories of slaughtering animals,
goat,
which again is, yeah, and maybe you want to share that memory because it sounds similar to the kind of memory that you had. I don't know if you have a traumatic memory.
Yeah, well, mine was so in Muslim tradition, when your child is born, I believe you have a goat slaughtered, and then you cook
Kind
the
of
meat.
celebratory.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
then you cook the meat, and then some goes to the family, and then others goes to like the poor.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Well, I guess
So
the story behind it was that
Yeah.
who were that? I don't even know. I just know that like they replaced the child like God told.
Oh no,
Someone
that's
did that?
that's
Or is that
the
different?
that's the Abrahamic tradition
Oh, okay.
for celebrating Eid. But slaughtering animals
Where was the
is
context
a
of
common.
the goat thing though?
Yeah, that was
Why?
in the because the concept of sacrifice something which is most dear to you,
Oh,
and
okay.
and he ended up sacrificing or
Tempted,
getting
right?
ready to sacrifice. It's a
Tempted, yeah.
biblical
But did he
story.
turn it into a goat or did
and
he turn it
then
into something
then
else?
it turned into a goat.
Okay,
So
okay.
in memory of that
Okay, yeah, yeah.
that event.
That's what I thought.
So yeah, but we didn't have
Or like
a goat
6 and 8.
sacrificed when we were born. It was when we were older. I don't know. I was eight or nine maybe.
Yeah.
And I didn't know like how
What
it all
killing
worked.
was,
So like
yeah.
they brought a goat, and then like this guy came, and I don't speak Urdu, so he brought the butcher knife like towards me so I can put my hand on it to like bless it.
Mm.
But I was thinking, oh, he wants me to like take the knife. So I was like, I can't do this. And then I think either my mom or dad was like, no, just put your hand on the knife. You don't have to do anything. And then yeah, it's pretty gruesome
Yeah.
to watch.
We watched
so.
him bleed out. It
Yeah.
was not
But
pretty.
but what's interesting is we sanitize slaughter and killing here. I mean, it's we eat just as much meat, probably more meat than many other countries in this country. But
I think we just disconnect it.
yes,
Yeah.
yes,
The killing portion because most of
Yes.
it is obviously factory. done.
Yes.
And then it's not that clean.
yes,
If you look at the conditions of it,
Yeah.
they're like
Yeah,
The
yeah.
the
loss
cages are very small and stuff, but like we're so I guess, like, disconnected from that.
But what is your memory, and what were you kind of in the poem that you have written about the slaughtering of a pig?
So this is a specific poem deals with slaughtering or killing this pig, right? But it's kind of like a bond between a father and a son,
Mm-hmm.
because as a young kid I remember that we once in a while my dad, we would sacrifice, kill, or
Mhm.
slaughter a pig in order for him to sell the meat and
Mhm.
makes some
Mhm.
money out of it. And I remember that he would tell me, "Oh, I'm gonna wake you up," but at the beginning he would tell me,
Mm-hmm.
but then he would just forget, right?
Mhm.
But I'll be like, "Hey, wake me up. I wanna see these.
You
wanna
wanted
help
to
you,"
see the
right?
slaughter.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I wanna be part of it. I wanna help you and
Mhm.
just be around, I guess,
Yeah.
my dad.
Mhm.
And so what happens is that the poem is that it's just a memory of kind of like imagine that I woke up and I was part of this, seeing everything that I was seeing, and the connection is between the father and son. So it's kind of like that memory,
Yes.
that relationship, and then it goes back to the pig in a way of describing what the pig does before it's killed. So yeah, it's a kind of interesting memory.
Yeah,
You know.
I do have in my novel, I have a scene,
Oh.
a slaughter scene as well.
The boar?
No, actually, because
Spoilers alert.
Yeah, no, the boar is not slaughtered. It's partly because religiously it doesn't happen there. This was a cow being slaughtered during Eid. And the whole concept of, there's this concept of you're celebrating and this animal is, and some people will bring up the animal, kind of like anyone in a farm. You bring this up, but it's not a pet, but it's an animal that you have brought up, and then this animal is slaughtered.
Yeah.
But no hard feelings, basically.
Well, it's what the function is, right? I mean, at least in my hometown, we had a relationship with stock, like with animals that you need to kill or you need to consume at some point. Yeah, so it's interesting how that relationship develops and how when it comes to that moment. I think people do have feelings towards the animal, right? Because it's a living thing, but it's a different thing. You know that you have to do it because you need to sell the meat, and if you don't do it, you don't have money.
Well, that was the other thing which surprised me is growing up in a village in Pakistan. When the cow died of natural causes, it was extremely traumatic. Because that was a livelihood, and so people would actually mourn the death of a cow, and it wasn't because they missed the cow, it's they missed the opportunity to benefit their family by slaughtering the cow and selling the meat, or or having the cow for milk production or whatever. So I was surprised to see the level of trauma it created, not realizing the trauma was really about the functionality of the cow. It wasn't about the relationship with the cow. Maybe it was, I don't know. I mean, I never really got to talk in detail with anyone about it. I just observed it and thought, okay.
But there is that level of mourning.
Yes.
I mean, that's important.
Yes, it's an important something that is missing, and because everything tends to count. And it goes, I think, and I'm in the habit of bringing things around to the same place. It goes back to whether we talk about poetry or coding, that do we as a society end up having a lot more in general than we really need, and therefore the mourning doesn't even happen because it's nothing is really that important anymore. And is that where we are in the Bay Area, for example? We would never mourn a cow dying.
I think it goes to that retention span. I think it's we're so trained now that to just skip to the next thing. And then I think that's a cultural thing that is happening here. And that's what I think.
It'd probably be more
when you get an abundance of the resource, then it stops being so significant.
And if it's not a livelihood too.
And if it's not a livelihood, then you wouldn't do something like mourn it.
Probably be more traumatized by like a phone breaking.
Or
your
actually,
or your TV falling.
That would be the equivalent of that.
Yeah.
It's all perspective and your environment.
Or phone falling in water and.
Well, now they're waterproof.
Yes. Or not being able to, not having the coverage so you could get a replacement in time.
Oh yeah. If you don't have cellular data.
Yeah.
That's like.
So I know earlier we were talking about like trying to find inspiration, and what I do sometimes or a lot is I like to rearrange my workspace. So sometimes I'll work downstairs, sometimes I'll move my furniture upstairs. Are there kind of small things that you do, like moving around furniture, to try and spark motivation and inspiration? I know you had mentioned you like going for hikes and stuff. Is there anything else that I'm trying to find some tips on how to stay motivated.
I gotta be honest and say that, for motivation, right?
Yeah, it's just inspiration or motivation, both. Just something to like. So like coding for me, I stopped working in the business field because I initially found it interesting. Just I liked coding, but I needed more to keep me going. So I'll think about what all the possibilities, all the things, the apps I can make, all the functionality I can make. So that's the kind of inspiration and motivation, but there's dips where it's like I don't really care like about it, and sometimes when I move things around, like it helps reignite it. If I'm in a different space, I go back and think, oh man, like I can make this right now.
In particular, when we were talking about you now being a full-time professor,
Yeah.
faculty at Kenyatta, and how your passion for teaching is there, but somehow it's overpowering your passion for being a poet.
Yeah.
And how much ever creative you are in the classroom, it seems to be sapping away from your creativity as a poet. Have you intentionally made any changes in your surrounding or your lifestyle to reach out to that creative element in you as a poet?
So the answer is probably no. So it's a different, as I was trying to explain early on, right? When I was an agent and I was four different colleges, and then even before that, when I was working at the restaurant, and I had to work maybe two shifts, I'll come back home and I'll write, which is, I guess, it's I mean, working as in a restaurant and working as instructor or as a professor is not the same. So what I'm trying to get at, I think, is that when I was working at the restaurant, I was able to keep that side of my head that said, "Oh, you wanna just write now, right?" But now it's more kind of like, "Oh, I gotta think about what I'm gonna teach and things like that, right?" So it's a little.
You're probably mentally exhausted after teaching.
Yeah, I think that's what is happening. And what I'm trying to do right now is trying to go back to my old notes and say what are some of the ideas that I had, or what are some of the images that I was working, before, or what is the story that I wanted to write before. And I have a lot a lot of started half, not even half, but um, stories, but I don't find that little,
The spark.
that
What
pulls
was
me
the
back.
impetus in the past? Because I feel being in the company of others who are interested in the same thing as me helps motivate me sometimes. But what's interesting here is where, on the one hand, people can and others can inspire and help you think, but in the case of teaching, it's actually not inspiring to be creative. It's using your mental energy and your capacity. And how do you think you will switch that around? What process will you use? When do you think, if you could predict the future, if you had the Germanic predictability of the future, how would you move forward and predict your returning to poetry?
Do you think, like, if you taught some sort of, I think I might have missed this, but what do you teach English?
English is a second language.
English is a second language. If you were a professor of like some creative writing or poetry class, do you think that could be something where you're teaching other people kind of the basics that you've figured out, and then I don't know, maybe thinking about that kind of can help you think about more advanced things? Is that what professors do in even higher education, like the PhD?
Relate what's in the classroom with their
Like when you were doing PhD stuff, were your professors like, were they working on more advanced things as they were teaching?
In the field.
They were researching, yes, they were definitely, and that's, I think, the difference between a 4-year institution and a 2-year institution. In 2-year institutions, we are primarily instructors, teachers. We're not expected to do research. Now, even though you're not expected to do, you can, find ways to be creative. So it's extremely beneficial from the student perspective to have faculty who are trained faculty who know about teaching and learning, and they're not distracted by their research projects. However, for the individual professor, sometimes, as we're noticing, it can be kind of a balance of how do I find my personal fulfillment if there's more to my personal fulfillment or professional fulfillment in addition to teaching class as well, but there's something else I would like to do to demonstrate my creativity. So that's kind of the difference between the systems. But, and I'm going to push Gerardo a bit further again and say, how do you anticipate yourself being able to find a balance between your professional responsibility in the classroom and your personal, and I would suggest professional responsibility as a poet, of returning to being a creative poet and expressing your very valuable perspective, because you bring a perspective that is not commonly shared.
That's a tough one.
This is why Michael was afraid.
Michael doesn't want to get grilled by the wrath of Anika.
And Faisal too, I think. He's like, whew, I dodged a bullet. Mom was sick that day, so.
If we find the answer today,
Yeah.
I'll be super happy. I think it's just that it's kind of like the calling of the wild, if you will. At some point it's gonna, that energy or that whatever it's called, poetry writing in people is gonna call me back, and it's gonna come back to me. For right now at least, I'm still doing my writing a little bit, reading, writing in terms of just not to forget about the tools and the techniques, etc. Just practicing, if you will. But I think it's just time, in a way that that
to settle in.
Yeah, the call of the poetry is gonna come back, and it's gonna make that appearance again in my.
I'm sure, though, you must think of your Gerardo 10 years ago in, what is it now, 2019? So 2009, the Gerardo in 2009, and if he could see where you are now, what do you think you would, because I think of myself and I think, 10 years ago, what was I doing? And I've now written this book, and it's going to be published. And did I think I would be able to do it? No, it still surprises me that has happened. What, from your perspective, do you think 10 years ago, Gerardo, you would be so surprised if you saw what Gerardo Pacheco is doing today?
Wow. So I think it's
basically, what are you proud about? What accomplishments do you feel? I've done what I would not have imagined.
Well, in 2009, I was still at the university.
Okay.
For my doing my MFA. So I was graduating with my bachelor's, and I was thinking about going back to school. And I was writing a little bit. I think if you will, I have accomplished a lot in a way. I've published some poems here and there, and I think that's a big accomplishment. It's not easy, as you probably have experience, and now I'm in teaching, which I didn't really have it clear in 2009, I think, right? But now it's something that is with me, and I embrace that. I embrace the opportunity, and I think and I'm keep writing, here and there.
Yeah. What about the two of you? What do you
too.
think? Yeah.
I think I was thinking about law school at that time. Well, thinking about that's the career path I would go, because I didn't really think about marketing or anything like that professionally. And then interest-wise, I mean, it's pretty much stayed the same: video games, cooking.
Were you interested in cooking back then?
Pizzas. I feel
Yes.
like.
Yeah. Yeah.
Pizzas and.
So Daniel has picked up this whole repertoire of cooking, which
Wow.
is unique to any of the rest of us in the family, because none of us are structured cooks.
Mhm.
But
Right now I'm
talk a bit about
focused on like stir fries.
yes,
I think it's always phases of like what I'm interested in.
yes.
So yeah, now it's like whatever stir fry I can like look up and find out about, and then I'll start making
But
that.
all the
But all the
materials are
yeah, I think I'm more interested in the materials. So like sharpening knives on like a whetstone, like just maintaining that. The cutting board, cast iron takes a lot of maintenance. So in a way, like sometimes I'm more interested in the actual like like material than the actual cooking.
I'm curious
Wow.
what Mayan cuisine is like. So I
Yeah, I was thinking
imagine
that too.
I imagine Mexican food is a combination of the people who were there before it was Mexico.
Yeah.
So Spanish and Mayan, and I don't know whoever else was there.
Mayans.
Mayan.
Spanish.
Okay, sorry. It was not in order. I was just.
It was not in order.
So I'm curious, like, what are some traditional Mayan dishes? Because I have no idea.
I guess our I'm not the best one to be
Okay.
asked, but I guess there is a really different way of cooking there. We use a lot of what we have around, meaning that we use a lot of wood, we use a lot of the earth as well to cook as ovens and things like that.
Tell us a bit about that. What do you mean use the earth as an oven?
So we have this dish which is called cochinito pibil, and what cochinito pibil is basically pig. It's pork, right? I mean, what you do, you just bury the pig in a pit with fire, coal, and all that. So you got to be a really good cook. I mean, a really good, doing this. You have to know how many hours you have to leave that, bury it, and then when you take it out, it's ready.
So you season it and then wrap it up in.
course.
So what do you wrap it up in?
You have this called achiote, which is seeds, I guess,
Okay.
and what you do kind of like a paste. You smear the pig, or you know,
Yes.
and then you put it with some moist.
Yes.
You wrap it with banana leaves, and you put
So
it.
you've eaten this meal. You've eaten this.
That's what I
food?
ate last time.
Oh, you did. Okay.
Got a headache.
And when is it made? I mean, is it a special event kind of thing? Is it made and kept, to eat whenever in the pantry or?
Yes, I think you don't make it every day, kind of thing.
Yes.
You're supposed to make it kind of like whenever you have the pig, and whenever like a special holidays, if you will.
Yeah,
And yeah.
So you went back home after many years.
Yeah.
How long was the gap?
18 years.
18
Wow.
years.
18 years. Yeah.
Tell us about what your impression was about seeing your loved ones and family after 18 years, and what was their impression of you, even though you were phone conversations
Yeah.
and so on, but was there anything that stood out where people said, oh my goodness, Gerardo, you're exactly the same, or you've changed?
Well, I haven't. People, no, I mean, they never,
Oh, you
they
didn't
haven't told
ask.
me, right?
Okay.
I mean, they haven't.
What were your thoughts?
Well, that's the thing. I think the life there, it's really slow. Like you put one of those videos on YouTube, and you slow it down. That's the way I see
It's
things.
kind of, to some extent, yes. I know what you mean.
And
Similar
it's
And
not
to
does it make
Pakistan.
you? Yeah. Does it make you impatient though? That's particularly because we're not living there, not working there.
Yeah.
So that's something which is worth thinking about.
Yes,
I mean,
of course.
Yeah.
And in my case, I was out of there for 18 years. So when I got there, it was like a culture shock, and everything moved slow. And I was expecting things to be faster, like here, right?
yes, yes.
Which there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that I was kind of like,
Or did people slow things down because you were there? Was it kind of we're in vacation mode? Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this huge meal, spending hours and hours
Yeah.
preparing it.
maybe that too, maybe that too. But I think it's I've been there a couple times, and it's really,
It
really,
it is.
you know,
So just the day-to-day meal making, because I know that is kind of slow sometimes.
I mean everything. I mean, for instance, where I live, I don't have a car, so I have to go and get a bus
Okay.
and travel to wherever I have to.
Yes, yes.
And I have to walk all over the place, which
You
is
have to work
nothing
things
wrong.
out. Yes, no.
But it's just the way it is.
Mhm.
Things are done there, and it takes time. That's when I say it's
I
slow.
used to miss having lunch. Not that we don't have lunch here, but lunch here is just a snack.
Yeah.
And I missed that luxury of, and it wasn't because I wanted to eat. It was just okay, we don't have to work, you've got now a couple of hours where you spend eating, and then maybe you'll take a nap if it's the summer. And then really your day is done because, as a teacher, we weren't expected to go back to school. School started early. I was teaching there. I would go to school, I think, around 7 o'clock. We'd come home around 1:32.
Yeah.
And then the day was ours. I felt the workday here was so long. It was kind of 9 to 5. You go home and it's dark. I mean,
Especially now,
I
right?
missed home, yes. So I kind of had some extent the reverse. I do get impatient now sometimes when I go and I think, get things done quickly, but you think, there's the pleasure of slowing things down. Because what else am I going to do?
Exactly.
What other great stuff am I going to take care of? If things happen quickly.
Exactly.
So
The rhythm of life, I think, is
it's different to get used to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the weather. I mean, over there is really hot, but that's another story.
No. Tell us about. So the weather's hot there,
Yeah.
and but your lifestyle is based on the weather.
All this sounds very similar to Pakistan, almost identical.
Yes.
Just
yes.
the slowness. I mean, I guess I don't really interact with that many working people when I was visiting there, but yeah, so it just feels very slow, and then it's very hot. So
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and sometimes the two are very closely interrelated because it's so hot. You can't really do anything, or you have to do things earlier on in the day
Sure.
because by the midday it's really hot and you're going to just take a nap anyway, or you're going to be kind of half awake while you're doing stuff because it's too hot. But I also wonder what do we accomplish by life being so fast?
Deadlines, meetings.
More things.
More
I don't know.
things.
That's a hard question.
Are we more productive?
Guess it depends.
Well,
on
I don't think just working nonstop is necessarily productive. Because we don't know if someone says they work 9 to 5. We don't know
Yeah.
of those hours how many are the actual effective hours. I kind of wanted to pivot a little bit. So we were
Go ahead.
talking about China recently, and they're kind of accelerating their growth in the software field, specifically artificial intelligence. And I think the 60 Minutes.
Yes, it was
They were
60
saying that they developed some tools to be able to use machine learning to scan someone's face and determine if they'd be a good teacher to children, I think. And I was kind of curious. So I've been hearing a few things about China kind of coming up in the technology industry and competing with the Silicon Valley is known to be the hub of it, but clearly China is growing as well. Do you know of growing markets in Mexico? It doesn't have to be technology, but are there any industries that you know of that are growing, even just from
Something you would
maybe
think
not
of.
global standards, but even for Mexico standards? I know, and this is the only fact I know, is Ford, I know, moved a lot of factories to Mexico, I think. Is there anything like that you know of in regards to any sort of industry or anything?
Yeah, I think I can speak just what I seen in my hometown, right? There is an explosion of people preparing food in their homes and selling them in their
Oh,
homes.
okay.
Okay.
Home,
Home cooked, but yes,
so that's
catering.
huge.
Okay. I've seen videos of like people
Oh,
in
yeah.
LA, like they'll not just like food trucks, but they'll kind of in like Compton and the lower income areas, they'll do like this. They'll actually do this fusion. It's like I think they called it like Black Mexican or something. I don't know if you saw the video, but it's like they're taking Mexican food and infusing it with
Oh yeah, I think I've seen that. Yeah.
their kind of style, and but yeah, they're kind of doing it in their front lawn and as a business and stuff. So
Or they'll have like restaurants in their home kind of thing, where like
Mhm.
people will come and like they'll set up the meal and stuff and cook for them.
yeah,
So the food industry or the cooking in general
and
is
yeah, and I think
Yeah,
social
bigger
media
thing.
helps too, because now, I mean, before I don't know, it'd be kind of hard to get. You would just get people
Get
who
people to
walk
come.
through the neighborhood, but now you can, if you have an Instagram account, you can take a picture and then start promoting your.
So
your-
how are how cell phones? I mean, they're big in Pakistan. How is it in Mexico?
Yeah, there is.
Everyone has
yeah.
their cell phone, and are they using them kind of in the similar way that we use it here with, social media
Yeah.
and WhatsApp and
Yeah.
all of those other.
Facebook, and all
Yes,
that,
yes, so
Instagram.
They are connecting.
all
Do
of
they-
those.
Yeah.
I know in China they do like buying and selling, or like money transfers basically through their
Yes,
phone.
yes.
Do they do the same thing in Mexico? I don't know if they do
Yeah,
that
I
in
know.
Pakistan
I
too.
don't
It's like
think
the
so.
what do you call it? It allows. It's kind of on the same lines of like the cooking out of your home, but it's these apps that like Venmo. It's an easy way for anybody to
exchange.
become a vendor of anything,
Yeah.
right? Before you'd need to maybe work with a bank, but now like the poorest of the poor, as long as they have a cell phone, they can set up an account and then they can collect money for whatever business they're doing, and that's really changing the way.
In India and Pakistan.
Yeah, in India and
Mhm.
Pakistan, and even
Yeah.
I know I worked with my previous boss who's from China. She was mentioning that in China too, you could go to like fruit vendors, and now like they all have smartphones, and they
There's
actually
a money exchange.
yeah,
through
money
the phone.
exchange, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. So I've noticed one thing, and I don't know. It's based on no previous knowledge or not a lot of knowledge, but I feel that Mexico is very progressive in the arts, competitively so. And I say this now secondhand, based on some of the movies that we see coming up from, in particular, Roma was one of them that I was just mentioning earlier. I think the director is from Mexico. I'm not sure, but it's
Yeah.
one of those finalists for movies,
Sundance,
Oscars. Yeah.
something.
So it seems, at least as much as maybe I seek out that kind of thing. You never know if it's the reality, but it seems as if the arts are a place where Mexico City in particular, maybe, or Mexico in general, I'm not sure, is leading in, at least in the Americas, it seems like. I don't know if you watch movies that much, or are
Not as much,
Yeah.
but if we just think about art in general, and you think about what is the heritage that cultures like Mayans and Aztecs and older civilizations left in Mexico. You have a case that yes, there is a lot of influence as just the land and the art that there is left there. So yeah.
Do you think there's let's see, how do I word this? I have an idea. I don't know how to say it. And it's not a controversial idea. So you were talking about like the heritage of art, at least in the United States, as it is becoming a mixing pot of races. Do you think the heritage of art becomes less important, at least for maybe art in the United States? If somebody makes something and they're like 10 different races combined, let's say 100 years in the future.
Oh, so it doesn't become race or culture specific because it's so
So,
intertwined.
Yeah, does the whole where it came from just not matter anymore? Is that even a significant thing now? Yeah, it's a very.
I don't think we're there yet. I feel the what were traditionally the either marginalized cultures or ethnicities or perspectives have not really infiltrated to the larger mass media or the mass arts. I feel, and so I think we're not at that point where you pick up a book and you see all these different perspectives in it, where you're not you're not looking for who's the author and who are the characters and what gender and all of that.
Do you think there will ever be a time where you'll combine all of that into one lane? Like you said, you don't see it in the mainstream. I don't know. I get this feeling that there will be the mainstream, and then there will be all the other lanes, and then maybe the mainstream will. Maybe one of the other streams will become a mainstream, but it'll never combine into, or the what you call the mainstream now will not necessarily be looking to pick up the outside lanes.
So part of the controversy, I think, about it is that some cultures or perspectives get suppressed when you bring things together. So I would imagine that the goal is not to intertwine them to that extent, because things will go missing as you bring them closer together. And if you don't have a Mayan poet, for example, what's the population of people who identify with the Mayan heritage, and will it slowly disappear if there's a more dominant culture or perspective? So the argument could be that you really don't want that to be the ideal, because you always want the kind of a range of perspectives, and you don't want one to disappear. On the other hand, the flip side of it is, as far as evolution goes, I mean, look at all the cultures that are not existent anymore.
Yeah.
So maybe
Wouldn't
it's just
matter.
part of the maybe it's just part of the human development. I don't know. I just contradicted myself, which I do all the time.
So what's the significance of art's impact on like in a very functional way on like daily life? Like for me, the art I enjoy would be like music and video games. I enjoy art in those mediums, and it kind of it entertains me for the most part. I don't know that I don't know if it drives any change in my day-to-day life. Do you guys think that art plays a role in people's day-to-day lives?
It's a very controversial question now, isn't it? Because it's a very existential kind of question. What is the role of art in, human civilization?
Yeah.
And there's a very
Beyond,
important part. It's not and to some it might be the existence of humans is through art, because you see, when civilizations have been the most traumatized, that's times, at least there have been times where art in some form has helped heal those civilizations or helped heal those individuals. So even though you might say we can drink and eat and take care of the basic necessities, I do feel because we now are living, as what we said earlier on today, that we're not on the cusp of trauma or tragedy. But if we were, that's probably where we might see more of the highlight of the role of art. At this point, we're so surrounded by art in a variety of forms, we just kind of take it for granted.
I think art is makes it easier to get other people's perspectives, whereas maybe you wouldn't be interested in just hearing someone talk if you hear them rap, or if you hear them hear their
Read
story
a
through a
poem.
song, or
Yeah.
through
Yes.
a poem, or see it in a movie. Like, it's a perspective you might not have seen before, or even
Art,
thought
yeah.
they were living that life, but it makes it more interesting.
Yeah.
So I think in that way it's important, because we're
Maybe art helps reveal truth where it's otherwise shrouded in day-to-day life.
yeah.
And then also it can avail the opportunity to give people meaning. So not necessarily on a large scale. One piece of some art is not going to give purpose to a large group, but if it gives purpose to one individual, then
Yeah.
that could have a positive effect, and then that can spawn, who knows what that person's going to do in a positive way. So maybe that
Yeah.
is
I agree with
some
that.
of
You
it.
answered your own
I
question.
answered-
Yeah. So,
Yeah, good.
are we going to hear a poem, or would you rather
Sure.
put? Oh, you have. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, let me just pull my computer.
Sure.
Okay.
And
And this is a good. We're already at our 1 hour mark, so this is a
Right.
nice way to.
yeah.
Transition
And I
out.
just want to say that I think art, in a way of this process of creativity or creation, right, if you will, it's an important thing, and at least for me, that's what I use when it comes to write or get influence or inspire, if you will,
Right.
art. So
So we will close out on the poem.
Yeah.
And our guest, while Gerardo is setting up, our guest next week is the famous, infamous
Munim?
Munim Rana. Yes.
Question mark?
Munim Rana, yes,
Yeah.
I think so. He did agree. And then the week after that, we will be calling in to England for Selma.
And Gerardo, is there any website you want to plug? Anything you want, the projects you're working on that you want the people out there to know about?
no, I think I don't have. I mean, I do have a website, but it's really what is it? The opposite.
Yeah, the
of
WordPress.
updated,
Yeah,
right?
well, that's all right. It's still got some of
Unupdated.
your poems, so we'll post that.
Yeah.
I can
So
put it in
people want to-
description. But what is the name of the web?
What is it? WordPress.
Okay, it's a.
Something like that with WordPress.
Okay. I'll get it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'll send you guys.
Sounds
So,
good.
Okay.
So I'm gonna read that poem about the pig.
Okay.
And since we spent a lot of time talking about memory. The title is, Have you ever listened to a pig being slaughtered at night? A butcher old as the wind whistles in the middle of the night. He has turned his back to me and has stopped sharpening his ice pick. He is now looking for something in his burlap. Father hired the old butcher to slaughter the pig. On the side of the empty street, the old man has built a fire. Father woke me up. I promised I could help with the pig slaughter. My job is to carry the pig intestines, the liver, and the heart to mi abuela. Mi abuela is too old by now. She cannot come down from our house to pick up her beloved entrails anymore. Mi abuela doesn't like father. The fire swallows, fireflies, and cicadas rush to the fire. A big metal cauldron sits over the fire, a black thing that soon glows red hot as the fire keeps on licking its button. The smell of solid lard melting in the cauldron rushes through my nostrils. I must pour water into the boiling cauldron. The smell of green wood burning at night clenches to my cloth and sweaty skin. The sound of scraping steel makes me stop. The old butcher has a grin in his face. He is ready to slaughter the pig. The pig paces back and forth behind the house and nuzzles mud. The pig knows death lingers too close to her long bones. Tonight, the pig can smell death just as I do, burning in the melting lard and the hot boiling water. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Great.
Yes.
And on that note, thank you viewers for watching, and we'll catch you next time. Toodaloo.
Bye.